We've been talking about climate change, facts, fictions, and solutions, and now we're finally on to question 4. What can we do about this huge global problem? Future change depends on the choices we make now. It's true that a certain amount of change is inevitable, as if you've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for a couple of decades. Even if you stop today, there will be impacts. But the vast majority of future impacts can be avoided by choosing our future. Will we continue to depend on fossil fuels that produce heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around our planet? Or will we be able to transition to clean sources of energy that don't produce heat-trapping gases? There's a huge difference between these two future outcomes. But this is where the science stops. Science can tell us what happens if you do this, what happens if you do that. But to figure out what's the best thing to do, it isn't just what's up here, it's also what's in here that matters. And climate change is now one of the most politically polarized issues in the entire United States. Even if we never agree about the politics, though, and as long as there's 2 or 3 people on this planet, I don't think they will ever agree about the politics, be encouraged to know that many of us already do agree about both the impacts and the solutions. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to go back to those Yale climate opinion maps that we've looked at in a couple of videos so far. This time, I'm first of all going to show you a map of people who think that global warming is happening. Is climate changing? The vast majority of people across the United States, and Canada too, they have Canadian maps as well, say yes, it is. Anything that is orange is above 50%, and the darker the color, the more people say yes. Do people think that global warming will harm plants and animals? Yes, they do. Again, most of the country is not just orange, but darker orange. So the majority of people think yes, that it will harm plants and animals. What about solutions? Do you support requiring, not just asking, but requiring utilities to produce 20% of their electricity or more from renewable sources? Again, yes. What about, do you support setting CO2 limits on coal-fired power plants? Yes. And do you support funding research into renewable energy? That one's a no-brainer. I think it's about 85% of people on average across the United States say yes to that one. So what can we do when it comes to this huge global issue? One of the first things we can do is we can acknowledge that yes, it is real. It is happening and it's affecting real people today, whether we live in Texas or Bangladesh, whether we live in North America, Africa, Southeast Asia, it is affecting us today. Not only that, but it just makes sense to prepare. Whether we live in Texas, where drip irrigation in the ground is replacing those old pivot irrigation systems that waste so much water, or whether it's in the Netherlands, where they're building floating villages. So if sea level goes up 2, 3, 4, even 5 feet, you just buy another 5 feet of anchor chain. It also makes sense, though, to reduce our carbon emissions and to invest in the new clean energy economy. Every Friday on my Facebook page, I've been posting new trends in clean energy, and some of the biggest trends that people are talking about are not happening in Texas, even though in Texas, since January, we've been getting about 23% of our electricity from wind. No, some of the biggest trends people are talking about are what's happening in Africa and India, where record low prices in solar energy and innovative new pay-as-you-go solar schemes are providing electricity to people who, many of them, didn't even have it. In Texas, Fort Hood, the biggest military installation in the country, just signed a new contract for wind and solar energy that's going to save them over $165 million over the lifetime of the contract compared to natural gas. As I mentioned before, in 2016, we got about 12% of our electricity from wind, and in 2017, so far in the first quarter, almost 24% has come from wind. That's almost twice as much. There's even entire towns all over the country, including the little town of Georgetown, Texas, that are going 100% green. In the case of Georgetown, they're doing it to save money. You may say, well, but what about China? Because we could do everything we could, but still China's putting out all that pollution, all that soot, all that smog, all that carbon from burning coal. What about China? What about China? Well, yes, they have terrible air quality in China, but things are changing quickly. They now have more wind and solar energy than any other country in the entire world. And this past year, they announced they're going to spend $360 billion to create 13 million new jobs in the clean energy industry. That's amazing. In the United States, there's the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. You're only allowed to join it if you join with a member from the opposite party. So it always has exactly the same number of Democrat versus Republican members, and they're adding new members every day. A great thing we can do is call your congressman or woman and ask them, hey, have you heard of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus? And would you consider joining? Or if they're already part of it, thank them. The most important thing we need, though, moving forward is we need hope. Because our choices and our actions do make a difference. And there is a lot that we can do. One of the biggest things we can do may surprise you. It's not necessarily changing light bulbs like I talk about in this little global weirding video. If you haven't seen the global weirding videos, you can check them out on YouTube. Just look for global weirding. They're these short 5-minute segments on all of these questions we might have. And one of them is, I'm just one person, what can I do? One of the most important things we can do, though, is not changing our light bulbs. It's actually talking about this problem. Because surveys have showed that, on average, about 3/4 of people in the United States hear somebody else talk about climate change less than several times a year. Some people never. Why would we think this problem is important if we don't talk about it? But when we do talk about it, how can we talk about it? Yes, we can talk about how it's affecting us in the places where we live. We can talk about how it's affecting trees and plants and birds and animals. We can talk about how it's affecting the economy and national security and our water and our energy and our food. But we can also talk about cool stuff like Tesla's solar panel shingles, where you can actually have these shingles on your roof that are solar panels and a battery in your garage that saves it all. Or how there's cars now that you can just plug in. Or about how eating lower down the food chain not just cuts carbon, but is also better for our health. There's all kinds of conversations we can have about solutions too, and we can encourage our community to join. Like this church that offered its roof to its community as a solar garden, because it's a lot cheaper to put one giant set of solar panels on one big roof than to put little sets of solar panels on people's individual roofs. We can talk about these cool stories, and that's why I share so many of these on my Facebook page too. One of the recent stories I shared is about solar panels on the ground. So often we see these pictures, right, of these solar panel fields in California and Nevada that are in deserts with just barren, dry ground under them. And we might even think in the back of our minds, well, do solar panels destroy the ground? No, they're just in deserts. So up in Minnesota, they're looking at putting in natural grasses and pollinator-friendly natural wildflower species in solar fields so that we can actually encourage insects and bees, we can restore the natural environment, and we can grow our own energy at the same time. The bottom line is, it doesn't just take our head, it takes our heart when we're talking about caring about a changing climate and doing everything we can to fix it. So I'm going to close with a quote from my favorite scientist, Jane Goodall, who said that it's only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony that we can achieve our full potential. Thank you.